Welcome into the Storycraft Cafe. I am your host, Hank Garner. Joining me today, as always, Josh Hayes, Rick Partlow, Steve Bowyer slash Jamie Castle. We are here to talk about writing and rewriting. And today I thought it would be fun to explore what publishing looks like in 2023. Um, the publishing landscape has changed greatly over the last 100 years, most definitely in the last 10 years, have we seen just exponential changes. And or exponential is probably not the right word, but a complete shift in the way the publishing industry works and the way that you can get your stories out to readers. The whole landscape has changed. And today I thought it'd be fun to kind of explore some of those and what it looks like in 2023, what publishing your book has looked like over the last decade, and maybe some thoughts about where we're headed. Um, Welcome, guys.
Wow, hey.
Hi.
Thanks for having us, Hank.
When you told us we were going to be doing this, I prepared a PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that we couldn't do that through here. So I'll just describe most of it for you. It's
Okay. Well,
it's a dumpster
What color
on
is it?
fire. That's what the
dumpster on
publishing
fire.
industry looks like. It's just a big dumpster and then flames shooting out of the top.
To quote 1984, the publishing industry is a giant boot stomping on your face over and over.
That'll work too. I mean, I could make that part of my PowerPoint presentation.
I was kind of hoping for some uplifting.
Here's the
publishing
uplifting.
talk.
This
And
guy
then I remembered I
publishes
invited
books.
Steve, who
I do. Me. That's uplifting.
Steve, what I find interesting is that you have empowered dozens, if not hundreds, of people to take their stories and get them out to the world, and have so many success stories that you can personally attest to. Yet you also are one of the most critical people, and I mean that in a loving way, of the publishing industry. So
So I
please
make a huge distinction.
justify yourself.
I make a huge distinction between, and this is going to sound arrogant. I don't care. I can sound arrogant. I make a huge distinction between what Athon does and then the publishing industry at large. The reason that Athon Books exists is because of the state of the publishing industry. We have taken authors that, by all senses of the word, should not have a voice in science fiction and fantasy, and given them the opportunity to make millions of dollars. I was looking at our author list the other day, and we have several authors who have made over $1 million in the last 2 years. That wouldn't exist. That doesn't exist in the publishing industry at large. So when I am critical of the publishing industry, first of all, I do love the publishing industry. I have a lot of friends in the trad pub world. I have some books published by trad pub, but the reality is, when I look at our contract versus a trad pub contract, it is not even the same ball game that you're playing. Everything's very, very predatory in that. Everything from when you look at ads on Facebook for how to write your next big novel, how to become an author, and build your author career in a year. These things that are just like predatory concepts that are not. You can't just replicate something down the line, or else we would do it every time. Rick Partlow is a phenomenal example of an author who could have a tremendously massive series and then a bunch of ones that did well. If we could replicate everything in perfection, we would have everything Rick puts out look like Drop Trooper. Instead,
the rest is all crap.
No, it's definitely not. And that's the sad part, is that you have written 54 phenomenal books. I can't look at one that I've read, and I've read quite a few of your books, by the way, and tell you that any of them are worse than Drop Trooper. So what is it? What is it that does it? There's so many factors that go into it. But what TradPub tends to do is instead of giving higher percentage royalties, you get much, much lower percentage royalties. And then the only way something becomes really big is if it's pay to play. And we thank you, Jesus, we saw Barnes and Noble stand up against this recently. And we also saw Barnes and Noble go from shutting down 100 stores to now reopening 30 of them because they brought in a new guy who refused to pay to play. It used to be that the publishers could spend millions of dollars to guarantee that every Barnes and Noble would buy a certain number of a particular book and give it a certain spot on every single shelf. And when they looked at what was happening, a handful of books were selling and the rest were just sitting on the shelves. Now he refuses to take money for placement. He allows each individual bookstore staff to determine what books go on the shelves. And they have a 97% sales rate for every book that goes onto their shelves.
That's wild.
It's insane.
That
But
is.
it's indicative of what the publishing market has looked like. We like this author. We like this book. Here's $10 million. Make it the bestseller you have. Meanwhile, it doesn't mean we like it. Just look at Spotify. How many garbage songs get shoved down our throat on playlists? And it looks like people like it when really all they're doing is hitting play and it's playing that song because we're forced to listen to it. We're told go buy something about crawdads, whether it's a good book or not. We're told to go buy this book because so many people are telling us to buy it that we go, well, if I don't read it, I don't know I'm not a part of the reader world.
Something about crawdads, like the sequel to Something About Mary.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. There was, that crawdad book might have been fantastic, but it sold enough because it was forced to sell enough that it became a movie, which then sold more. And I hate that I'm using a specific example, but that's just the book that popped into my head.
Well,
Friggin' Matthew McConaughey is #1 again on Audible. What is that? He's not that popular.
Who?
Matthew McConaughey's book.
Oh, yeah.
It's been #1 for like 2 years off and on. And it's like 6 hours long.
Yeah, and it's not that great a book. When you get past Matthew McConaughey's shtick, all right.
I got nothing against Matthew McConaughey, but
what
that does is it tells me there's something happening on the back end that's going, buy Matt McConaughey.
Right.
Buy this. For 2 years. Like, that's bonkers.
Yeah.
So the publishing industry is dumpster fire, but there are some tremendous ways to find your way into this industry, even if that means self-publication, where you can make more money doing that than you ever will doing trad. And you won't need to pay an agent 15%. You won't need to change your book to meet their narrative. You won't have to do all the crazy things that are required of you in the trad market just to get a book where in the trad market, the average book sells 12 copies.
Well, and there's also everybody talks about going trad and getting your books on the shelves, but I know of several book deals with trad publishers where they don't get print books on shelves. That they don't get distribution.
I can't believe I'm going to do this, but I want to share numbers with you so that you have I might get in trouble for this, but I'm going to do it anyway. Okay. Cold as Hell sold thousands and thousands and thousands of print copies off of shelves in bookstores. Of those thousands, 5,000 plus, I think, close to 10,000 maybe. Of those thousands, you know how many were from Barnes and Noble? 175.
Oh, wow.
All the rest of them, indie bookstores.
Really?
What that's telling me is that the indie buyer has a better idea of what people are actually reading than Big Pub. And I know I just talked a lot of good things about Barnes and Noble, but remember, they are still very, very strictly traditional publishing.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like Barnes Noble might be trying to correct some of that.
They're turning it around, for sure.
But that's a huge ship to course correct.
One of our biggest sellers is a place called Fountain Books in Oregon. And they just fell in love with the book and sold it to everyone who walked in, right? Like, this book's fantastic. You got to read it. And it wasn't necessarily the placement. It was when somebody comes in and goes, do you have any suggestions for me? And the workers go, yeah, this was great. Read it. And then they continually came back and said, "Oh, we love that book. Do you have anything else like it?"
There's an interesting connection between the publishing industry and the music industry, and I see a lot of parallels in these two industries, and you can speak to both, Steve, because I think you um, had some dealings in the music industry where kind of around the same time that the sea change was happening, and I think you can speak to this also, but there used to be a time where you could have regional hits on with music, and something just really blew up in the deep south or in uh, you know what the Rust Belt or something that really spoke to this group of people, and it might erupt into a national hit or it might not, but there were people who could make a good living on regional hits. And I kind of feel like some of that is like you were just talking about the bookstore in Oregon, where a certain group of people have really resonated with this thing, and it's kind of taken a life of its own there. It's had national success also, but I find it interesting that you have these pockets
Yeah,
where things can,
Colorado's another one. We sell like crazy in Colorado.
yeah,
Why? Because it's about fucking cowboys. Excuse me,
yeah,
freaking cowboys. And so what you're talking about with the music industry has been destroyed by the syndicated radio station.
yeah, the homogenous nature of, why me in South Mississippi might like the same thing as someone in Portland, maybe, but probably not a lot of cross pollination there. I don't know, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I won't talk forever, but
Yeah,
that's the way that I see it. Is that
That's not like you.
every radio station plays the same thing, regardless of whether. And a lot of it is money driven. A lot of it is we've got this new Miley Cyrus hit. We want it to be big, and they do pay the radio stations to play it. And
Payola.
What's that, Rick?
Payola.
Yeah, it's just it's really it's a sad time for artists in general because we have to contend with corporations. And I'm very pro-capitalist, but we all know that there's the evil side of capitalism, and that's what's prevailing here.
But it's been this way for a while now. It's been this way since the late 90s.
Yep, it's not brand new. Good. Yep.
So Rick, Drop Trooper originally began as an indie pub.
No.
No?
Drop Trooper was always an Athon book.
Okay.
My first Athon series with
mistaken.
them was Wholesale Slaughter. The books that I have that used to be indie published but are now Athon are Birthright novels, Recon series, Acheron,
It was
upcoming
Birthright I was
War.
thinking about.
Yeah, they all were indie published first, and a lot of them did really well. But there's just there is a lot of in-depth business knowledge that goes into making money off a series that already had its day, and I do not have that knowledge, which is why I
Well,
said to Athon, can you guys do something with these?
let's rewind for just a minute, because those books that you indie published, if I remember your story correctly, and correct me, but there was a time where you tried to get traditionally published. You had an
Yes.
agent, and just never was finding the traction that you wanted. And then you found an audience when you decided to indie pub, and you had more success than you anticipated, and then kind of had to rush to kind of learn the business side of it to take advantage of the traction that you got.
I was woefully unprepared for success. When I put out my first two books, the ones that I tried to get published traditionally, I put them both out at 99 cents at the same time, and they sold like between the two of them 30,000 copies that first year, but it was at 99 cents, and I didn't have anything else out. I didn't know. Oh, when you put out your first book at 99 cents, you're supposed to have like 3 books already written that you can put out and make your money from people buying the other book. I didn't know any of that. I was just 2011. I didn't know where to look. So I did not get another book out for a year after that, and then it took a year for the next book, and so on and so forth, until finally 5 years later, I started writing faster and outlining and getting more books out. And it was at that point, like the end of 2016, the beginning of 2017, that I started having like real financial success at it, because finally I had like 7 books, and it, I had like a package trilogy. It was pretty
Right.
long that I put Glory Boy out, and then people would go from that to read the Rebirthright books, and it did pretty good. But again, it took a lot of marketing know-how to capitalize on that. And though I was writing faster and doing better with other things like covers, I still knew nothing about marketing, and any money I threw at it was basically just setting it on fire. So
Well, that was you said you kind of stumbled into the way to launch a book at the time. Put a book up for 99 cents, have a back catalog you could steer readers toward, and kind of get those funnels working for you. Does that still hold true today? Is that how that was very much
I've heard it's changing.
yeah, I think it has, but what do you guys think about if you've got a book that you're launching today? Um, what's the big splash that you use? Used to be it was release it at 99 cents, have funnels to direct people to buy other product. Does that still work?
Everything comes down to genre. As a matter of fact, I have a call right after this. I have a call with Amazon to discuss all the AI stuff going on and sort of give them, whatever. But one of the things I'm going to bring up in that meeting, and I have as a sort of an agenda point, is discussing with them whether or not there is an algorithmic stifling of the 99 cents book. Because over the past several months, now there's a lot, right? So if you want to get deep, we can get deep, but I won't get like uber deep. There was a change in everything about 4 months ago where you were able to be in 10 categories, and then they changed it so that you could only rank in 3 categories. Problem is, I really don't believe that was a purposeful decision by Amazon. I think that there's an error in their system that they've yet to rectify, and they just owned that error by telling us, oh no, that's how it works now. Because we can see there's an application called Publisher Rocket that Dave Chesson makes, and you can look at all of the numbers, and you can see where May was literally the top 30 made 16 grand, and then boom, next month top 30 made 3 grand. It was this huge drop that consistently came until we are here right now. And so I think there was an error between the front end and the back end in Amazon, and they just owned the lie. They can't figure out what the problem is. I don't believe it was on purpose because it's costing them money hands over fist. But in conjunction with that, we also saw this steep decline in science fiction sales. Unfortunately, what happened there was we can also look at, okay, J.N. Chaney's putting out more books, and J.N. Chaney owns the market. He's, there's just no argument there. Jeff's a good friend of mine, but at the same time, like the number of books that he's putting out cannibalizes what everybody else can do. And of course, we're lucky that we got Rick, we got Jeff Haskell, we've got several others who still make it in. But launching a new science fiction series is difficult. And so part of it is, okay, are they stifling the 99 cents? If they are, the problem is the readers don't know that. So to launch at $4.99 to meet the Amazon demand doesn't mean that the readers are going to go, I'm going to pay $4.99 for this. If the readers are still, I want 99-cent books, but Amazon's not algorithmically pushing those 99 cents, we're at a standstill with what we could do. So Rhett and my job, like Rick was talking about, he didn't have necessarily that business mind. Rhett and my job is to do this all day long. All we do is look at numbers and data and bullcrap to try to figure out what is that next push that we need to make in order to get these books selling the way that we know they can and should. And sometimes that takes time, and it's really unfortunate because you have books scheduled for a specific period of time, and everything's leading up to that. And sometimes there's nothing you can do to change that release date. Amazon still owns release dates to a degree. So then we have to go, okay, what do? We throw more money at it because that's the only real recourse we have is to throw more money. When you're an indie published author, you don't always have more money to throw at something. Your budget might have been $250 and that's it, period. That's all of my marketing money. You can't go, well, I guess I'm going to put 5,000 into it. So the 99-cent thing is still a tactic that we use because we don't yet know what other tactic to use. And the readers are still wanting that 99 cents. Now, that's not true in Lit RPG. Lit RPG, you publish at full price. Romance probably is still a 99-cent book one market. Thrillers is a full price market. Fantasy is a full price market. It all depends on the genre that you're writing and what the reader expectation is. And you have to know that stuff. And the only way to know that is to really do your homework on what sells and why it sells. If people looked at J.N. Chaney and tried to copy J.N. Chaney, they would quickly realize that the reason he sells is because the algorithm loves him, because he puts out a book every 2 weeks with his name on it. And, you know, whether it's co-written or whatever, it's still got that algorithm going. Rick, the reason Rick sells, he writes fast and he writes good books, and we can continually keep the market moving along without flooding it with Rick. We can still keep people getting their Rick Partlow fix, and the algorithm goes, I love Rick.
I need to buy the algorithm some flowers.
Right? But again, remember, Rick writes good books. Chaney writes good books. This isn't what it was in 2014. Lowest viable product. This isn't the most number of books you can write. Don't get it edited. This isn't that. You still have to write good books, and we just got really blessed with the fact that Rick can do that quickly.
We'll see what happens with this ChatGPT stuff, I guess.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what the future looks like, and how it's going to be interesting to me to see how the consumer responds to that. I think that's anyway, that's another conversation that we are going to have soon. I find it interesting how different genres perform, but also how the authors work in that space. For instance, we're talking about science fiction. Like you said, very good books, rapidly written and released is better. I was talking with Taylor Adams yesterday, who's a psychological suspense author, and he's a trad pub guy, and he puts out one book a year, and they are all standalones. And I asked him, I said, Taylor, is there ever a temptation to take one of these characters that you've written and series eyes, write another story that, another adventure this character goes on? And he looked at me like, well, no, I've never thought of that. I've never been tempted to do that. And mostly because I kill off everybody in my books, but it's like one book a year, all standalones. And, I have no idea what his sales numbers, from what I understand, are pretty good. He's a full-time writer, which is becoming more and more rare in trad pub circles.
Well,
I find it interesting how different these two genres are.
I think it's rare in every aspect of publishing. Being a full-time author is hard, whether you're doing it indie or trad.
It's always been rare.
And I think that if a lot of people like indie because they're like, oh, that's my way into being a full-time author. And it's not a lot of the times, for various reasons.
Find is that it's work.
It's a lot of work, and it's a lot of work that doesn't have anything to do with writing.
Exactly.
It's a lot of work, and it's extremely difficult to get right. And you can take $500 and throw it at a problem, or you can take $5,000 and throw it at a problem. It might not work. You might not sell books, and that's that's the reality of any publishing, whether it's traditional or indie, is it doesn't matter sometimes how good the book is or how much money you throw at it. Sometimes they just don't sell, and that's reality. And I think a lot of people have the misconception of, I can self-publish a book, throw a whole bunch of money at it, and eventually it'll make me $1 million. And it's just not the case. You've got to be a good author. First of all, you've got to be a good writer, and you've got to write a great story. And I think a lot of people take advantage of the indie space where publishing fast and somewhat mediocre books will make you some money, but you have to look at quality over quantity there and go, are you releasing 100 books in a year to make $50,000, or are you releasing 6 books a year to make $50,000? Like, you really kind of have to look at that and go, what's the staying power of that, and is it sustainable for you as an author? Rick writes ridiculously fast, but I know that there is going to come a point, and he might already be there, where he gets to a point where, I want to slow down and not do 8 books a year, not do 10 books a year, because eventually, I'm not saying you're going to run out of stories, but eventually the steam at which you're punching those words is really going to run out, especially if you're doing it that consistent pace. But
I've been doing it for since 2017.
Yeah. Well, I'm not saying you will, but I'm saying that for the majority of people, working 7 days a week for years and years and years is just not sustainable, especially when you're not seeing
but
success.
It's not work.
Yeah.
It's fun.
Yeah, and that's an argument I make a lot is, people ask me how I have 2 days a day, right? There's this stupid video that goes around that's like, I have 12 days in a work week or whatever. He's like, I get up at 7 and I work till noon. That's a day. And then I work from 1 to 8 and that's a day. And I'm doing double what you're doing. And it's like the stupidest video I've ever seen. But for me, there's actually a part of it that's true. I work from 7:30 to about noon, and that feels like one day. I do specific things during that time, and then I have lunch and I come back, and then I have what I feel like is a completely separate day. But at no point do I feel like I'm working. Like, this is the stuff I would do for fun.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's not always going to be true for everyone, but it's definitely something to say when you can love what you do for work.
Rick, how long have you been writing full time? Could support yourself on your writing?
Well, I've only taken the leap to making my income the main income for our family from writing for 3 years now. But pretty much, I was making a full-time income since 2017. So like 5.5 years ish.
What was the when you got to that point where you could sustain yourself from your writing, and you decided to go full time with that? What was that decision like? What was it, something you wrestled with for a while? And
Yeah, like I said, I was right. I was making enough money for like 2.5 years to make that decision, but really, I only had to make it when we decided to move out of Florida, because my wife is a pharmacist, and in Florida she had a stable, well-paying job, and we moved to Wyoming, and here she does not. She can only work part-time some days. I mean, and it was a lot of pressure. It was a big decision to move away from that stable job with health care and health insurance and all that stuff, to something that's potentially totally unstable.
So Rick had a cool advantage, which didn't seem like an advantage to him, I'm sure, but he experienced what it's like to have a book that sold really well in Glory Boy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then experience what happens when you don't really follow the model. So it's very easy, I think, for authors sometimes to go, I made $40,000 this month. I can do this forever. And then 4 months later, they're making $1,200. 6 months later, they're making $600. And now they've quit their job. They've quit their career. I have so many authors who come to me asking about going full time. And I say, please don't do it. And I have so many authors that did it anyway. And oftentimes those are our most difficult authors because they tend to look at us as the way that they stay full time when that is not our goal for them at all. I shouldn't say that. I mean, yes, the goal is to help authors go full time, but at the same time, we don't expect that most authors should ever go full time. It's a fickle business.
In reality, since writing as a career became a thing, the vast majority of authors have not been full-time authors. If you look at it, a lot of them were academics, college professors, school teachers, librarians, whatever. People who had a stable job already, and they wrote and only a very few of them were successful enough that they were able to go to that full time.
I actually found it counterproductive is the wrong word, but I went full time in 2019 when I replaced my cop salary with my book salary, and then I had the fall off. I had a couple of years that I didn't sell very many books at all, and was very stressed about that, and had a lot of bouts with depression about that. And I have a very unique view of writing in this space because, like Steve said, most authors are not full-time. I personally believe that you write better books if you're relying on something else to make your income. Because, and this is not true for everyone, it's true for me. When I'm looking at trying to get a book out as fast as possible, I may not take as much time and care with that story because all I'm worried about is getting it published so I can have another payday. Whereas I have a job. It's a part-time job technically, but I don't have to rely on my book money to make a living. And so I can take the time to make that book the best book that I can make it. And I think that should be the goal of all writers. I think your goal should not be to be a full-time author. Your goal is to write the best, absolute best story that you can write.
Rick, how many hours do you write a day?
It's hard to say because I don't do what some people do where they sit down at the computer and they write for 2 hours and then they go do something else and they come back. I write, 100, 500 words. Then I go do something else and I come back and write 300 words. So basically I am writing from, wow, the wind's picking up outside. I'm writing from, by the time I wake up until like midnight or 1 a.m, but I'm not doing it the whole time. I'm just like writing some and doing something else.
Well, the reason I bring it up is it just happened last night. I was looking at just our authors in general and trying to see where sort of the best sellers are and what the gaps between all of them are. And I landed on myself, which I very, very rarely do. I don't usually look at landed on myself. I don't usually look at my sales numbers, but for those this is an informative discussion. I want to just make this transparent for everybody. I have, as Jamie Castle, I have sold hundreds of thousands of books. I could not be a full-time author. Financially couldn't do it. Mentally couldn't do it, right? Because to keep up the pace to do that Rick sells what I've sold in 5 or 6 years, Rick can sell in a year, right? And so for me to be able to maintain that, I would be writing constantly. I would be fighting to pay bills. Because those hundreds of thousands of books, you've got to remember, some of them were 99 cents. Some of them were box sets at 99 cents. And of course, then there's KU reads and all of that. But like, I was also looking at, like, I put out a book maybe every 3 months versus one a month.
Was that lightning, Rick?
Yeah, here, I'll show you guys what's going on outside.
I just saw your whole office just
look,
light up.
Oh, wow.
Good grief. That's
Look at the wind blowing out
rain
there.
right there.
Well, anyway, that was
Awesome.
just for transparency's sake. Selling hundreds of thousands of books does not equate to actually being able to afford to live full time as an author.
Well, that brings me to another question that I thought, what is the typical life cycle of a book? Because I think a lot of people look at, you know, really successful, famous authors, and like John Grisham, for example, and you think that he puts out a legal thriller once a year, some years twice a year, but mostly once a year. And I'm sure each one of those books does fairly well, but I just wonder how many copies of The Firm or A Time to Kill are still kind of filling in, his income each year. So, a typical
I don't
book.
know John Grisham, but I do know from talking to other trad published very successful writers I know.
Yeah.
Usually there's one or two series that make most of their money, and they write new stuff, and
Right.
as it comes out, it starts to make money. But basically, they have one series, maybe two, where they keep writing books in, and as the new book comes out, it makes a bunch of money, and that series still sells, and everything else is kind of lower level. I mean, it's kind of, I guess it's kind of the same for me with the Drop Trooper books. That's the one that still sells. Everything else sells some and falls off, and sells some and falls off, and that's the way it is for the people I know in trad publishing too.
Yeah, you got to look at the reasons behind everything, which again is things that's what Rhett and I do with Athon is we go, okay, so John Grisham sells. Why does John Grisham sell? He sells because he's a household name and there's been movies that have been made after his books.
Right.
When somebody goes crime thriller, you go, or courtroom, whatever, you go, John Grisham. That's literally the name that comes to mind. Kids fantasy, there's a name that comes to mind immediately, right? J.K. Rowling.
I was going to say R.L. Stein, but that's horror.
Well, sure. I mean, horror, right? But what I'm saying is that if I name a genre, probably all four of us are going to go for that same name because we're so familiar with it. Now, if you take that down to sort of the indie world, if you put out a best-selling title today, and I'm talking best-selling, I don't know, top 100 in Amazon, and did not put out a sequel for a year, you would stop earning on that book in about 6 to 8 months. That's a bestseller, right? But the typical book has about a 3-week life cycle before you need a sequel to continue that thing going. How does that?
I think that would shock a lot of people writing a book. I think that would shock them.
Yeah, this isn't I wrote a book and it's going to make me money forever. This is I wrote a book and now I have to write my next book. And it's a really garbage place that we are in the industry, but there's not a whole lot of household names coming out anymore. Even in the trad pub world, you don't hear about these new authors quite like you did in the 80s and the 90s and even the early 2000s because the indie scene took over.
Yeah.
When Harry Potter was coming out, you would see on the network news, these book launch events where people were, stacked up outside the bookstore. Yeah. And I remember, I don't know, it was when book 7 came out or whatever, that we ordered from Amazon because we were going to get the book a day early, I think it was, or something like that, and all the kids, looking out the kitchen windows, for the UPS driver, it was an event. Are there book series authors like that anymore?
I mean,
I think there are
Shirtaloon for sure. Defiance of the Fall for sure. J.M. Clark for sure. We've got several of them that as soon as that book goes on pre-order, it's a bestseller and it stays that way for 6 months until the book comes out.
Wow.
Right. But those are, again, we're talking about Lit RPG, which is a new market where people are still very, very excited about the big projects in there. That's how sci-fi was 10 years ago.
In 2 or 3 years, Lit RPG will be a different market.
It'll just be a different market, and we'll probably see the lean toward the 99-cent book one. And so much of that just has to do with the flooding of the market. And
I was going to say that it's kind of when you mentioned having events and waiting for the next book come out. It's like the streaming wars that happened, and now that there's so many streaming services now, right, that are making TV shows that people can just binge and watch, just at the click of a button. And there's so many of them that you don't, it was like back in the day when I don't know, like when Castle first came out. It was on network TV. There weren't any streaming services, and everybody watched Castle, or whatever it was, Star Trek, or whatever show that came out, like say in the 90s. Everybody talked about those shows because there was only a few networks, TNT, USA, that kind of thing, and there wasn't very many options. So everybody talked about those. The same thing with books. Before indie digital publishing became a thing, you had to wait for the book to come out, and you'd have a book a year or so between books, and you just had to wait to go get it. And then that was the only thing to read, because there wasn't anything else. I mean, there was, right, but not on the same scale. And now there's thousands of books being published every day. Like every minute, 100 books go on sale for Amazon. I'm sure that's even just an underestimated number severely, right? But so it's not the event, the time from when you could publish a book and become just this massive success, first of all, it never really existed, but now it does not happen anymore, just because of the
Well, what Steve was saying about authors that are must buy, that people look for them. It's the same with movies now. There is a recent survey done of moviegoers, what actors will you go see a movie because they're in it? And almost every single one of them is in their 50s. The only one that was under 40 was Chris Hemsworth, and he's about to turn 40. And people don't go to movies for the new generation of actors anymore. There's no movie stars, just like there's no there's no writers who are star authors that people go to buy their books coming up. They're all older. They're all people who established themselves, 20 years.
Has social media played into that?
100%. We are so overloaded with entertainment that we don't need to be entertained.
I mean, look at like Chris Pratt, right? Chris Pratt is arguably one of the biggest movie stars right now.
But he can't make a successful movie that's not
right.
Guardians of the Galaxy.
Right. Guardians of the Galaxy or the
Jurassic World
franchise movies is what he's in. Even The Terminal List. Nobody watched The Terminal List because Chris Pratt was in it. They watched The Terminal List because of the novel series and how
I'm going to argue further than that. They didn't watch it because of the novel series. They watched it because everywhere they went, somebody was telling them they had to watch it with an ad.
I'll give you that.
You opened up Amazon Prime and it was like, you better watch The Terminal List or we'll cancel your account. Like, it was
you're watching The Terminal List or he's going to come hunt you down and kill you.
Right.
And the crazy thing about the Terminal List,
waiting with a hatchet somewhere.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. The crazy thing about those books is I don't have anything against Jack Carr as a person or an author, but me personally, I don't think his books are that great. But you look at like what made that book successful.
Let me send Jack an email.
Quick. Send Jack an email. I read the first book, thought it was okay. The second book was not great because half of the book didn't matter. And then I stopped reading the third book just because it was wet. But anyway, Jack Carr had a whole social thing around him as a Navy SEAL, which helped him sell that book. I mean, Jack Carr had all the people in the military complex that are readers that were going to read the book. He was in with Joe Rogan. He had all these other things.
But Jack Carr was never in the military.
Well, Jack Carr is a pseudonym. The author was, right.
But no, there was two authors. One of them was Navy SEAL, and one was a
Right.
was a co-writer.
But Jack Carr was never in either.
Yeah. But he had a platform that
I'm only
sold his
kidding.
book. And
he also built a platform because fun fact, I gave him his very first interview when the Terminal List first came out. I was the first podcast he was ever on.
nice.
And he then afterwards sent me a package in the mail with a hardcover of the Terminal List with a long handwritten note in the front of it. And then in his second book, he thanked me in the and a whole bunch of other people. Don't get me wrong. Like
this book is dedicated to Hank Garner. Only Hank Garner.
Right. Yeah. A page all by itself. But he cultivated this kind of, this network of connections he was making.
Yeah, and also he would basically talk to via email or whatever anyone.
Right.
I have a friend who was worked for the Department of Defense and has done work as a contractor, so he knows a lot of the special operations people. And Jack Carr, he talked to Jack Carr via email for months until Jack Carr got big, and then he kind of dropped off. But while he was pushing that first book, he would have long email conversations with basically anybody who was connected in any way to special operations, publishing.
Well, no, that's what I mean. Like he built his audience, and then it took on a life of its own after that. And that's that doesn't necessarily happen in trad pub a lot. It happens more in indie pub, I think, that the building of your audience.
He definitely had an indie mindset in his marketing.
For sure.
Yeah. And
our most successful authors are generally the ones that do some work.
Yeah.
Those who are able to reach their readers, those who are able to help with ads, right? Because we tell people all the time, we're running ads, but our ads are targeted to what we think they should be targeted to. You're probably going to end up targeting a totally different group of people. We're not asking you to spend hundreds of dollars, but we are asking, if you're able, go ahead and throw $5-10 at some ads and see where it takes some things. And a lot of times they go, oh, these ads are doing something. I'll add a little bit more money to it. And they start to cultivate their own group. Only about this last year did I start really building the Jamie Castle fan page. And, I've got something like 900 people on there, which is a pretty moderate, like it's modest. But I've tried everything I can to connect with individual people who comment on my stuff.
For sure.
Because when they feel like you're friends with them, and listen, I'll message them. They'll message me. Like you're saying, if you can get relationships with your readers, they'll buy everything that you put out. And it's not just about manipulating your readers into buying it. I genuinely love people, so I'll talk to anyone. But finding that way of connecting with people is vital to selling books. If I could bring up one more, I think we're almost out of time. I don't know, but like Hugh Howey is a really interesting example. We've got Silo coming out on Amazon Prime, or maybe it's already out.
It's on Apple.
Thank you. And it's already out. Is that right?
Comes out on the 1st or the 2nd or something.
Yeah, we're really close to it.
Take what Hugh Howey did 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Try that today.
Yeah.
Hugh Howey would be a failure. I love you, Hugh, wherever you are and whatever.
He's a product of his time.
For sure.
Like, not novellas didn't work. These short stories, these weird, just the weird way that he did that was so indicative of the period of time at which he launched. And we can look at so many authors over the course of the last 15 years and go, okay, here is why they had success. There's still ones where we go, I have no idea. But you can really pinpoint the fathers of genres, the mothers of genres, and go, oh, they did it. They're so big because they were one of the first to do it, or they were so big because they did this. Well,
as funny as it sounds, I managed to build an audience back in 2011 by talking to people about my military science fiction on a couple of firearms message forums.
That's why Larry Correia is so big. I mean,
yeah.
Scott
and that's why I say I didn't do it right, but I did get a bunch of people who had read my books. So when I started putting out more books, they were ready to read them. And you can't do it that way anymore, because back in 2011, somebody saying, "Hey, I wrote a book. Do you want to read it?" was a novelty, and nobody cares. Like, "Oh, that's cool." Now it's like, "Oh, stop talking about your damn book."
For sure.
We're going to kick you off this message forum.
Well, we also live in the only industry where it's considered to be bad form to self-promote yourself.
Right.
Imagine if you invented a pillow. I don't know, right?
Huh.
Imagine if you
Your own pillow?
Imagine if you bought
my pillow. It's
you invented
mine.
your pillow, yourpillow.com. But you weren't allowed to tell anyone about your pillow without people going, "You are just a rotten self-promoter, blah, blah, blah." Business wouldn't exist, but we have been shoved into this place where it's wrong to encourage people to read your book.
Well, and I think that
Yeah, that's ludicrous.
We're talking like the whole point of this show was to talk about what to do with your book, and I don't know that we touched a whole lot of that. We did some really deep background on a lot of stuff. I would say personally, like, ask yourself what you're trying to do with the book. Like, because you can go trad pub route if that's the route you want to go. If you want to go the indie route, well, you can. You're going to get rejections probably,
you can
but
try
you can go that route.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that if you go like through a hybrid publisher, you get accepted. I mean, Athon rejects books all the time. If you self pub, like with everything, you have to meter your expectations a lot. Because especially like we were talking about at the beginning of the show with all these predatory practices that are out there. I saw an Instagram ad where this dude was like, "You can make $25,000 on your book," or whatever. And I go and I look at his website, and he has purchase plans where you can purchase a package and they'll do this, and this. Like the top package was like 25 grand. And it was like, "We'll get you on a podcast and you'll have this and that." And I'm like,
wow, podcast.
You could do that for free. Like, you could do everything that they're talking about for free if you just took a little bit of time and did it yourself. But I think you really need to just understand what you're trying to do. If you're just trying to get your book into a few people's hands, self-publish it and see how it does. If I would say a lot of people come in there be like, "I want to be an author. What do I do?" And my legit answer is spend 5 or 6 years doing what you do and don't worry about selling books. Just practice writing and write a good story, because if you come into indie publishing or whatever it is, and your mindset is, "I'm going to write a best-selling novel and I want to be a full-time author," that's exactly the wrong mindset to have coming into being a creator. Because when it comes down to it, we're all storytellers. So when you have that book done and you've told the best story that you can tell, then look at your options. What kind of book is it? Is it a romance book? Is it a sci-fi book? If it's we've been talking about genre, if it's a epic fantasy book, those books can sell indie, but the bigger market is trad for that particular genre. You can sell them. I know a lot of people personally that sell epic fantasy in the indie space, but mill sci-fi sells better in an indie space than epic fantasy, and mill sci-fi sells better in the indie space than trad pub. Lit RPG really doesn't sell in trad pub at all. I mean, there are some lit RPGs that are sold in trad pub, but that is for right now anyway, that's a big indie thing. Romance can go either way, really. But you need to really take your time and focus on A, your craft, and then B, what you want to do with it. And then the resources are out there. The podcasts are out there. You're spending a year of your life writing a book. Take some hours during that year and figure out what's going on in the space. Like what is the best practice? And a lot of that stuff is free. You don't have to pay for anything.
And talk to the people that have done it. Don't talk to the people that are sort of promoting it, right? I know some guys in the indie space who are predatory, taking advantage of authors, charging them $300 to get them onto some podcasts and to do this. Listen, Hank has been consistently one of the best and biggest independent author podcast interviewers, not just independent, but I'm speaking to the independent, right? And I've been on his show, what, Hank, a dozen times?
Probably.
Least. And I think Hank's okay with me saying this. Like, sales that come from Hank's show are negligible. That's nothing against Hank, but listeners generally are listening to a podcast to listen to a podcast, not to find the next thing that they're going to buy.
Right.
Yeah.
Unless that podcast name is Joe or Howard, it's not helping you sell books.
Right.
Yeah.
So go on there for a different reason. Go on there to, I don't know, excitedly talk about your book and maybe gain a few readers out of it.
Well, what happens when you hear a guest on a podcast, you become familiar with that creator, and that begins your relationship in your mind with that creator.
Well, and a lot of
you
times,
know-
if you're listening to a podcast for an author, it's not that you're trying to find an author, you're trying to find out more about the author that you already enjoy. And so, you know, Hank, you've had several authors on. I scroll through and go, I know that author, I like that author, I want to hear about his process,
Yeah,
or I want to
exactly.
hear more about him. And it's not technically a shopping network, even though I have listened to your
Yeah.
show and gone, oh, that, like, on a rotating deal, and I've found new authors through your show. But yeah, I mean,
Number one-
publicity is
Well,
go ahead.
I was just going to say the number one thing I've gained from being on shows with Hank and other podcasters is learning how to talk about my book.
Mm-hmm.
The
Well,
elevator
also
pitch is hard. Go ahead, Dirk.
what Steve was saying, there are predatory people out there trying to pitch plans and stuff, but even the ones who aren't predatory, who are in this honestly and honestly want to help people, a lot of them weren't successful as fiction writers. You know, they've been successful as nonfiction writers and having coaching and having plans and helping people, but the actual books that they wrote to sell for fiction didn't sell that well. And you have to wonder, you know, is the advice they're giving, even if it's given in good faith, is it really going to work for me?
Right.
I mean, maybe it'll make my sales go from, you know, $10 a month to $50 a month or $100 a month, but is listening to them going to make me go from $100 a month to $5,000 a month? Probably not.
Right.
Yeah. Looks like we are at the end of our hour, and Steve just had to step away for a conference call, I believe, that he's participating in, that he told us about earlier. I feel like we just scratched the surface today of publishing, and maybe we continue this next week with, and I'll try to come up with some more actionable
I think if we talk about
things.
like some of the specific difference, like it's kind of like rudimentary, kind of fundamentally level of what you're doing, but maybe the biggest differences between trad pub and indie, and that kind of breakdown of the way where everything is at might be helpful.
Yeah, I think it was a little naive to think that we were going to cover all of this today.
Hey, you guys know what we just go on these tangents, and you're just along for
and
the
that's
ride.
why you tune in. You tune
That's
in
right.
for the tangents. That's right. Josh, Rick, Steve, who's already dipped out, thanks for joining me, and we'll see you guys next time.
Absolutely. Thank
See
you.
ya.